Welcome to Barnraisers. This is episode 16 with Brian Smith. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Barnraisers, conversations with the world's ultimate team players. My name is Dan Stones, and I'm a team dynamics specialist. What does that mean, I hear you ask? Simply put, I challenge, inspire, and equip teams of all shapes and sizes from all over the world to work better together. I'm also a father, a husband, and my favourite type of workout is a spin class. So welcome back and Happy New Year. Perhaps I'm a bit late to the party, but I do hope that everyone out there had a great Christmas holiday. And if it's cold where you were tuning in from, I hope you kept warm. And if you're like me and going through a really hot summer, then I hope you managed to stay cool. Now, if you're new around here, welcome to the team. We're so glad you made it. So what's this show all about? Well, every 2 weeks, I share a unique conversation with one of the world's ultimate team players. And we deep dive into the insights, stories and experiences that made them part of some really special teams. And if you're a regular listener, welcome back. And thanks for your support and for sharing the show with your friends, colleagues and teammates. It really does mean a lot. But now it's time to get the ball rolling. It's time to introduce our special guest for this episode, Mr. Brian Smith. In some ways, the Brian Smith story starts out like many Australian boys and girls. He was raised with an enduring passion for surfing and the surf culture. In his youth, Brian enjoyed the epic waves on both the east and west coast of his home country, Australia. However, that's probably about as normal as Brian's story gets. After 10 years of not exactly relishing his role as a public accountant, Brian felt a burning desire to do something that would fit his passion for surfing, while looking for a business idea that would allow him to support himself. So he turned in his resignation notice, got on a plane to the States, and became a regular at the classic surfing destinations up and down the Southern California coastline. He called Malibu, Cardiff by the Sea, and Swami's Beach his office. Then, one day, while pulling on his sheepskin boots after a cold surf session, he realised that there were nothing like them available in California. And it was at this moment that the UGG brand was born. But it wasn't the overnight success that Brian and his partner thought it would be. In fact, had he not diligently stuck to his vision, the idea of UGG boots would never have come to fruition. Fast forward 17 years, and Brian finally sold his company and the brand to Decker's Outdoor Corporation. And with their huge resources, the casual comfort segment of the footwear industry came to life, and the UGG brand Brian created now generates more than $1 billion of sales per year, year after year. In this podcast, we go deeper into Brian's story, and we explore what it was like at the birthplace of one of the truly global brands of the last 30 years. Brian presents the ups and the downs of his journey, and then he also speaks about what he's up to these days, where Brian is now one of the most sought-after speakers in the world. And after this conversation, I can understand why. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my absolute pleasure to share this conversation with Brian Smith. So, Brian, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on. People know you as the UGG guy. And that's what you're most known for. But in terms of your overall life, I just wanted to start back a bit before we get into it. That only represents a really small time frame. UGG wasn't where your working life began, was it?
No way. I was an accountant. Started off in Canberra and moved to Sydney and then Perth for 10 years. And I graduated after 10 years of study and quit the same day.
The same day?
Yeah, I hated accounting.
So what do you actually remember of that? Was it one day as an order at AMP Society, or?
I recall in Sydney auditing that company, a big life insurance company. And one of the things I had to do was validate all the check payments. And I remember one day running down this ledger and I saw a check for $2 million. And I thought, shit, I wonder what that feels like. So I went and found the box of, paid checks. This is way before computers recorded it all. And I pulled it out and I held a check for $2 million. And I just thought, shit, it's just like a check for $10. And it gave me a different aspect on money. And ironically, the very last day I was in Sydney working, I had the day to kill, so I went down to the AMP Society just to fill in my last day. And I thought, I wonder what's the biggest check I can find. And so I went through all the ledgers, and I found one for $26 million. And I went over to the big filing cabinet, and I found the check, and I held it in my fingers, this check for $26 million. And I thought, that's just like another check for $10. And it made me realize that the numbers were insignificant, and that, maybe one day, I would, be in a business where I could hold a check like that. So that was a really interesting episode.
Absolutely. And as you said, that changes your perception of what those sort of figures and values mean. Did it change at all post that in terms of the way that you thought about money, or was that really a foundational thing that you took with you all the way through?
It made me realize that money's, just a means to an end. And I didn't really care for, big fortunes or I wanted to obviously be wealthy and do successful things in my life, but it wasn't really about the money anymore. It was more about just building a business that I could find and see what I could build it up to.
It sounds like passion was more important than the actual money. The actual thing that you'd be doing was more important than what you were going to get out of it.
Yeah, because if you figure out what you can do better than anybody else and do it, you're pretty much guaranteed success, even if you don't know at the beginning what it is you want to do. And one of the things in my book is that, a good entrepreneur must have a certain level of ignorance, because otherwise they just wouldn't start if they knew all the problems ahead.
That's for sure.
It was more about, just finding out what did I want to do with my life. And it wasn't a money-driven thing.
Yeah, and it comes across in the book. And we're going to talk about the book, The Birth of a Brand, in a moment in a bit more detail. But in the book, the beginnings weren't necessarily you knew exactly what you were going to do. If anything, you had the exact opposite plan in your mind to how things actually panned out.
Yeah, it's funny. I just discovered yoga back then. This is in the late 70s. And I was meditating one day and I thought, okay, well, now I'm not an accountant anymore. What do I do? And in this meditation, I thought, God damn it, all the big trends are coming out of California, like Levi jeans and waterbeds and all the surf brands and everything. So I decided I was going to go to America and find the next big thing and bring it back to Australia and make my fortune. So I, packed up. Within 2 weeks, I was in Los Angeles. I rented a house in Santa Monica and went surfing up at Malibu, because it's always been one of my great passions. And I was there for a month and didn't find the next big thing, and then another month and didn't find the next big thing. And I remember being at Malibu Beach one day, and it had got pretty cold. The water was really freezing. And I was putting on my sheepskin boots, and I thought, God damn, there's no sheepskin boots in America. And so me and a buddy, we called up a manufacturer in Albany, Western Australia, and ordered 6 pairs, and that was the beginning of my new career.
Amazing. And did you have, the feeling that you had when you had that realization? Looking back in hindsight, we can always join dots, and it always sort of makes perfect sense, and these things take on significance. But at that time, what was your feeling when you had that idea? Was it one of just, I'm all in because this has to work?
Oh, no, I was just in love with it, because I was going to be an instant millionaire, because, back then 1 in 2 Australians had some sort of sheepskin footwear, and America's very similar. And so I just thought it would be instant success. But when I bought the boots, the samples over, my buddy went to all the shoe retailers, and he must have brought back about 150 business cards of everyone he'd visited and no orders. And they all said, yeah, you're crazy, trying to sell sheepskin in California. But I knew that California's climate was just like Australia, so that wasn't the reason. And so like every good entrepreneur, when you hit the wall, you have to pivot, and I thought, well, how come all my buddies up at Malibu think it's the best idea in the world? And it struck me that they'd all, many of them been down to Australia on their surf trips, and they bought 4 or 5 pairs of boots back for their buddies. So within the surf community, it was pretty well known. So Doug and I pivoted, and we started visiting all the surf shop retailers. And every one of them that we visited with our samples said, oh, my God, what a great idea. I've got those things. My friend brought them back for me. They're the best things in the world. You're going to make a fortune. And this happened like in 30, 40, 50 surf shops that we visited. And, we never thought to ask for an order because we didn't have any inventory anyway. And that was a big mistake, because we raised about 20 grand and sent 15,000 down to the manufacturer in Albany and bought 500 pairs in. And, they arrived in December, and we went around to all the same surf shops. And this time we got full bags full of product and order pads, and they were going, oh, man, well done, Brian. But, we couldn't sell them in our store. We just sell surfboards and trunks and, sandals, and, they're way too expensive for us. You go to the shoe stores. And this happened over and over and over again, all the way down the coast. And when me and Doug finally regrouped back in my house at Santa Monica, we tallied up all the orders, and it was 28 pairs. Incredible disaster. We thought we were going to be instant millionaires. What we didn't bank on was that Americans don't understand sheepskin like Australians. Australians know that you can't sweat in it, and that you can get them wet, you wash them, they're really rugged. But Americans thought, oh, they're hot and sweaty and prickly, and you can't wear them in the snow, and, all these horrible misconceptions. And so what I thought would be a slam dunk turned out to be a really, really big uphill battle.
Yeah, and that's what the whole idea of the book and the whole story of the book, The Birth of a Brand, is all about. I mean, the idea of being an overnight success, it probably took you 15 years to become an overnight success in that sort of vein.
Very close, yeah.
Yeah, and I just thought the book was so powerful, and not only for entrepreneurs, but the stuff we'll talk about in terms of teams a little bit later on. But the thing I thought that really added to it was the photos that were included in the book. And there's one of your parents that I saw in there standing in front of, like, taking you back now to that real, what you called the first real warehouse at the scrapyard.
I had 3 warehouses that were all in my 3rd bedrooms, and then we finally got big enough to have to get a little place. And that's a great photo because they're pointing up at this little piece of cardboard that had UGG written on it I pulled it out from a trade show, and I nailed it up on top of the door frame. That was like a tongue-in-cheek, look at okay, we're now in the big time,
Exactly, and that sign, when you look at it from where the photo was taken, you sort of can't make it out. All you see is this dot above the door. It's an amazing photo to think now where it's all led to.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Can I ask what your parents thought of that decision? I mean, this whole story so far is you basically saying, I'm going off and I'm going to go and do this regardless, and I'll find a way. What was your parents' involvement in it, and what did they think of your decisions in the early days?
My dad fought it like crazy. He thought I was throwing my life away. And, his idea for me to be successful was to work as an accountant for a company and work up to be the controller and then the CFO, and then I would be successful. And, in my mind, that was like sentencing me to prison. And I finally won the argument when I said, look, Dad, you're a contractor. You've been at risk your whole life. And why are you afraid of me taking a risk? And then he sort of reflected on that and thought, that's a good point. He'd learned most of his lessons from the hard knocks of being a contractor, and he just figured, it's time for me to let go and make my own mistakes.
Oh, for sure. And I think also you'd have to admit that concern from any parent really comes out of a very positive place.
Yeah, it did. But my mother, on the other hand, she was my greatest cheerleader. All through my life, she was always encouraging me to take risks.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I think everyone needs that. There's a balance there, isn't there? Protection versus risk. And obviously with your accounting background, you would have known that going in.
Yeah, for sure. I should have known it better, but I didn't. But, being an accountant was not a handicap. I was really grateful that I had the skills to do all the accounting and everything. But we'll talk a little bit later about my greatest downfall, which was finance.
Before we get on to that, though, I do want to touch on a couple of themes in the book because they run so true. And I think teams need to do better jobs with these things, as do entrepreneurs. I mean, entrepreneurs don't survive unless they can handle, for instance, uncertainty. This whole book and your whole journey in those early years seems like it was just a whole dance with uncertainty.
That's the beauty of being an entrepreneur, is that, and why I have always loved being an entrepreneur, is that to always have the problems ahead of you to try and figure out, to me, is very exciting. And the beauty, and why I said you have to have ignorance to start out, you once you do start, the universe works it conspires to work with you in the weirdest ways. And there's always a solution to every problem. And I didn't know this going in, but it's something that I learned over the years, and it became a great theme of my book, which is, when you get faced with a whole set of scenarios that don't look good, you just got to wing it and make your best choice at the time. And when you look back years later, you'll find that they were the pivotal moments for the company. And that uncertainty was such a key element in success, because, if you had competitors out there that made wrong choices in uncertainty, that was when you were able to either survive or grab market share. And so I've got these 4 mantras, and one of them is feast upon uncertainty. And it takes uncertainty is sort of like a negative connotation. But when you have the attitude, I'm going to feast on uncertainty, it changes the nature of it to where it becomes an exciting choice. And that's when you look back and think, God damn, the uncertainty was the best part of the whole ride.
Yeah, and I love that because it also changes your focus as well. I think it gives you a sense that you're in control somehow, even in the midst of uncertainty. How you react to it, how you respond to it is up to you.
You just pick the eyes out of it. It gives you the feeling of control. And even if it's the wrong choice, doesn't matter. You're still in control, and you got another chance to fix it if you go wrong.
Yeah, and the question I've got about this, that from a team perspective or anyone who's dealing with uncertainty, is that we tend to stack it up. We sort of go, well, this is uncertain, therefore I can't tell what the next step is, or the next step, or the next step. When you deal with uncertainty, how far ahead do you actually look? Is it just to the next problem, or are you trying to sort of navigate the rapids further down the river?
There's one thing that I live by, which is if you can't act effectively, don't act. Right? And that's probably one of the my mentor over here, one of my investors told me that, and it's been a great truth for all of the years that I've been in business, the UGG business, and since. And that is that, if you're uncertain, don't just quickly make a decision for the sake of making the decision. Try and find out as much about it as you can, and then when you're faced with a couple of scenarios, pick the best one. So, if you can't act effectively, by not acting, you're sort of giving yourself a few more chances at the right solution.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think then the idea is that we're fighting there is that the excuse that we all give ourselves these days, which is we need to be busy, because busy then hides the uncertainty and makes it feel like we're in a bit more control. But I think with your take on it, we can actually change that without that need to creep in and try and do something, catching us out.
Yeah, and it may take a day or it may take a week, but by stalling when you're uncertain, it'll just give you a little bit more time for things to settle. More information will come in, or you'll think about it in a different way, and usually the decisions are much better that way.
Yeah, and then people also have that idea then that things will get worse if I don't act right now. What's your experience with that?
Well, there's another quote, which is a detail will always come back to haunt you. And if you make a choice just out of expedience, if it's the wrong choice, it's definitely going to come back to haunt you. And I've experienced that over and over and over again. And you can't be a good entrepreneur without making some uncertain decisions. And so you will be haunted now and again. But, generally you get to, as you get older, you get wiser and the decisions get better and better. So it's a process.
And then once you get over the uncertainty, it doesn't really get that much easier because you take your action and then not every action will yield the positive results that you hope for. You spoke about that at the top of the show.
Exactly. And then a bunch of new uncertainties come along.
Yeah, the process keeps iterating itself and you just hope that you're getting better at it as it goes along.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. So in the light of, you talk about it so well in the book, the way it's set out, it almost starts to read like a thriller, the life of this company that you're starting up. But in light of...
Everybody thinks it's a page turner, and I think it's because they're never sure I'm going to be around next chapter.
Oh, exactly right. Exactly right. And in light of year after year then of not hitting those goals or sort of having those things not go quite right and having disappointment, I believe that's now become one of your other mantras, but I'm interested to hear what have you learned about disappointment and how to handle that?
Well, my mantra for that is to fatten upon disappointment, which is another very positive way of handling a negative situation. But the disappointment when I sold the 28 pairs led to a great philosophy that formed the basis of the book, which is that you can't give birth to adults, right? Every business starts, every sandwich shop, every new sitcom on TV, every religion starts with someone conceiving it and then taking an action, which is the birth. So the birth of UGG was me buying 6 pairs of samples. And then every business or movement just lies there, and it lies there, and it lies there, and there's no amount of feeding, overfeeding, or jiggling the cradle or urging it. The infant can't get up and go to college, or university. It has to be an infant. But eventually, if you do keep feeding it and nurturing it, it'll eventually start to toddle, which is a really cool stage because, people are taking notice of your products or your service and magazines are writing articles about you, and that's a really cool stage. But that goes quickly into the youth phase. And the youth is probably the best stage for every business because you've got consistent orders and consistent production, and the shipping and receiving is happening, and the invoicing and accounting is working well. And, you can run a business from $2 to $20 million in that youth phase. But then if it's a really good product or service like UGG was, it's going to hit the teenage years. And you recall when you're a teenager, you want to be in every party in town. And it's like that with a business. You want to be at every trade show. You want to be in every mass retailer. And it's super, super dangerous because you can quickly outspend the capital that you have and get into financial problems, which I did. I almost lost control of UGG 3 different times in the teenage phase. But eventually the accountants come and put all the controls in, and it becomes a mature business. So that theme of my book is probably the most important theme for every entrepreneur to learn, because it's infallible. It doesn't matter whether it was, Steve Jobs in the garage or the guys at Microsoft, in a garage. It just takes forever to get started.
Yeah, and how did you cultivate, or did you ever cultivate that sense of acceptance of that, or was this something that you learnt later on, or how do you deal with that?
I formalized that thought later on because I'd been in business so long and I had started other businesses. The theme was, and I'd watched a lot of friends who'd started businesses, and all the successful ones went through that same slow start. And I also observed the ones that took off like a rocket immediately flamed out within a year or so as well, because it didn't put down the roots that you need for a solid business. So, feasting on uncertainty and fattening upon disappointment, they are 2 of the most important elements to have when you're a person starting out on a new path.
And then the next one that I think of when we talk about this then becomes patience. Because everyone who's in that position is screaming, ready to go. Some of them have got pressures to deal with, and these things are building up, and everyone wants positive results.
Yeah, we're always in. Like, I thought when I imported those first samples that I was going to be an instant millionaire, and here I am 5 years in the business and still haven't got any traction, you know. And I can remember how it was, you know, working 3 years, you know, summer jobs to see me through, and then running the UGG business for 3 months, you know, October, November, December each year. And the sales were like 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. And I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong, because I've been running all these ads with these models on the beach and perfect hair and, you know, clothing and boots up front and center in the ads. And I was getting nowhere. And I remember talking to a surf shop owner who's God, after all these years, he's coming around to my house this afternoon after 40 years. So
wow.
That's how good, how you know, I was such good friends with all my retailers. Anyway, he told me, Brian, oh, shut up. And he called out to the back room, and all these little grommets come running out. And he says, what do you guys think of Uggs? And they all said, oh, those Uggs, man, they're so fake. Have you seen those ads? Those models can't surf. And instantly I realized for 3 years I've been sending the wrong image to my target market. And I called up another Aussie, by the way, Pete Townend, who was a former world surf champion, and he was running this Scholastic Surf Association up in Orange County. And I called him up and said, hey, Pete, do you have any young kids who are going to turn pro soon? Because I don't have any money, but I can pay them in UGG boots. And he gave me these 2 young kids, and I went surfing with him. I chose 2 locations. One's Black's Beach in La Jolla, San Diego, and the other one is San Clemente, called Trestles. And these are iconic surf walks because they're about a mile each way, and you know, fantastic surf at the end. And I ran those ads featuring these kids on those walks, and I shot them myself with my little Canon Sure Shot, you know, and ran the ads, and the sales went to $200,000 because I finally connected my customers with the image that they were looking for. And it made me realize that's when I became a real student of, you know, advertising and marketing. And you never sell your product. You sell the benefit or the feeling or the emotion that your product will you know, impart to them. So the bottom line is all these kids were saying, oh, Mom, everyone at school, all the cool kids have got UGG boots at school. I want some for Christmas, you know. And so all the moms start walking the malls and everything. And before you know it, we got 200,000 in sales purely because I nailed the image that all these kids wanted to be part of. And that led to another bit of philosophy in the book, which is, you know, the quickest way for a tadpole to become a frog is to live every day happily as a tadpole. And that sounds really trite, but it's the one piece of philosophy everybody remembers. They'll see me a year later and they go, oh, you're the tadpole guy, you know, because it really, you know, shows that everyone has to sort of go through that same phase. I read the book called Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, who started Nike.
Right.
And the first 5 years of Nike was less than the first 5 years sales of UGG. And, you know, they just struggled for 5 or 6 years trying to get these nylon running shoes from Japan going. And it wasn't until the sport of jogging took off, and they were the best at what they did then, and they got sucked into this vortex of demand and became $1 million and $100 million and then $1 billion, you know. And another one was a company in Santa Monica, and they'd been nearly 10 years struggling to get this little white kid leather dance shoe popular, and they'd been advertising in dance magazines and, you know, cheerleading magazines and going after all the college cheerleaders and the high school cheerleaders. And then the sport of aerobics took off, and because they were the best in the market with that type of shoe at the time, Reebok got sucked into $100 million, then $1 billion as well. So even those giant corporations that we see today all started out smaller than UGG. It's hard to believe.
Yeah, absolutely it is. That's fascinating. I never thought of them in that context. I was sort of aware of the Nike story, but not in when you do those comparisons about those first few years. It really does highlight that everyone's just swimming in the same little pool when they first start.
Yeah, yeah. And if you can, just continue every day being a tadpole, trying to get better and better at what you do, something's got to change in the market, and suddenly you'll look back and go, shit, I'm a frog.
Yeah, that's right. And it can, as you say, the market will determine when that happens and how that happens a lot of the time. It's not necessarily going to be a cut-through decision that you make. You've just got to make sure you're in the right place and in the right pool at the right time.
Exactly. And at the right time doesn't mean like immediate, because when Nike started, they had no idea the sport of jogging would take off. When Reebok started, they had no idea that aerobics would take off one day. And with UGG, I was 17 years before the whole fashion market took off, and we can talk about that a little bit more later. But that was when I got it let's talk about that story now, because
yeah, please.
We were really big in the surf market, and I transferred that to snowboarding and skiing. And in back east, there's no one's read Surfer magazine, so I figured all the young kids are in the hockey rinks playing ice hockey all winter, and their moms had to sit in the rinks, and they're 40 degrees, and I don't know what that is in Celsius, but it's damn cold.
Cold.
And so the moms all started buying them, but there were all these fragmented images about what UGG was, and so I tried to get this cohesive casual comfort theme going in my marketing, and I ended up trying to get on the front page of the lifestyle section of this newspaper here called USA Today, which is a huge influencer of what's being cool.
Yeah, of course.
And I ended up getting on that front page, and the day that ran, there were retailers from all over the country calling us, how do we get UGGs, and consumers calling us from all across the country saying, hey, where's a retailer near us? And that was a huge step forward, and that led then to another piece of serendipitous, what I call karma. We'd been selling boots or sending boots to England every Christmas with like 20 pairs at a time for this woman in London, and it was a pain in the butt because it was 20 different addresses and 20 different customs forms, but we did it because it was Trudy Styler, who was the wife of Sting, and we wanted to be part of that whole celebrity thing.
Mm-hmm.
And one day she called me and said, Brian, I've got a biggest favor to ask you. I've just been to a seminar that's changed my world, and I want a most perfect gift for her. And she said, here's the address. Oprah, care of Oprah Winfrey, Chicago. As soon as we shipped them over to her, she immediately bought a whole bunch of boots for all her staff. And over the next couple of years, we were on national or international TV, on the best picks for Christmas, with 20 minutes of nothing but UGG on the Oprah show when she was at her peak. And so that was our bit of serendipitous karma. Just like Nike and Reebok, well, our takeoff was Oprah, and that took us worldwide almost overnight.
Yeah, and you became the frogs.
Yeah. It's a great way to look at it. It really is. I think that just happily swimming and doing what you need to do you didn't force that. You just did what you had to do at the time, which was supply to Sting's wife, and that was the step that you needed to take at the time. Yeah, and it was again just trying to be better at everything you do day by day by day. And as long as you keep trying to get better every day, eventually your time will come.
What sustained you in that period then while you're swimming around? We'll use the metaphor as a tadpole. What do you think sustained you? Is it patience, or is it determination, or is it something else, or is it all of it?
Both, yeah. Any entrepreneur is going to be impatient because we all think we should be doing better than we are. Even if you're $100 million, you're still not. In fact, I spoke from the States to a group called the Inc. 5000 members, and they were the fastest 5,000 fastest growing companies in the US, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I asked them at the beginning of my talk, I said, raise your hands if you feel successful. Right? Now, here's a room of 2,000 people who'd reached the pinnacle of success in their business to be able to qualify to be in the room, and not a single hand went up.
Wow.
And that's how entrepreneurs think of themselves. There's always something else to do. There's always some other way we could have done it. There's another way to look at this. God damn, I wish I had a position in my company that, and so as entrepreneurs, we're always impatient and we never feel like we've arrived. So we never feel successful. But, the bottom line is when you can, just hang in there daily doing what you do better and better every day, the point comes when the success just has to come your way.
Right. Yeah, you've just stacked it up so much in your favor that it just tips over.
Yeah, there is a tipping point for sure.
What if we change gears just a little bit, and I want to sort of focus on your journey in a team context for a moment, because reading the book, it was like I said before, it was a thriller, and everyone can get something out of it in that entrepreneurial sense, or just that journey, the persistence and everything that was displayed. But as someone who lives to learn everything they can about teams and collaboration, that for me was what was going on an interpersonal level and the team level and the company level. That to me was just riveting.
Yeah. Teams employees are always the hardest part of the equation to get right. And I don't think there's a person on the planet with a big company who hasn't made a bunch of mistakes in the teams that they put together. But the secret is to identify very quickly people who are not part of the team and figure out a way to marginalize them and hope they leave, Mm-hmm. And the critical element for a good team is that everyone has the same vision and a level of passion to have the same desired outcome. And that, it doesn't matter if you're a rugby team. Like I played rugby against the All Blacks and I played rugby against England, and it all came down to the team. There was never any star in there that was more important than anybody else. And we all had to have the same vision. And that's really translates beautifully into, any entrepreneurial business.
Yeah, because eventually you're going to have to work with other people. You did it from day dot, even though it was once your initial partner, Doug, moved on, it was still you, but you were teaming up with the retailers and the customers. I mean, that became your team. Yeah,
well, in fact, they were so loyal. There was a point, let's backtrack a little bit to when I was an accountant. I used to audit these used car yards in Perth, and I was just horrified when I'd be listening to the salesman in the next room describing how they just ripped off the last customer, And so I came into my UGG business with a horrible distaste for sales, because I always thought sales was getting and ripping off and, getting money out of people who didn't want to part with it. But there came a point after 4 or 5 years where I was in, one retailer here in San Diego, and I was realizing, God, he just bought $80,000 worth of boots this last season. And I thought, he marks it up 100%. So he just made 80 grand on me. And I thought, well, his rent on this little shop isn't 20 grand a year. And, that meant he had, 60,000 left. And that probably paid for most of his part-time employees. So everything else he sold out of his shop was going straight into his pocket. And I realized that I was no longer getting from these people. I was actually giving. I was a benefactor, helping them make profits. And as soon as I realized that, my whole attitude to customer service changed. And every time I walked into a store, I didn't even care if the owner was there or not. I would go straight to the sheepskin section. I'd tidy everything up and make sure, there were no size 4s or 13s left. So, I'd swap them out for size 7s and 8s, which I knew would sell. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of took on every store as my little bit of retail. And this built a tremendous loyalty with all of my retail customers. And, there were times down the road where they literally saved me through that loyalty.
Yeah, that came across in the book time and time again, didn't it? Just the fact that they wouldn't waver no matter what was going on with the business or out in the market.
That's right. And that's a really good sort of a warning for anyone doing business today, because, the situation's changed a lot with the internet coming online, and everything is websites and funnels and clicks, and it's so easy to lose touch with who your customer is. And I've got a couple of clients who are doing it really well. They're 100% selling on Facebook, and all that's done by impersonal clicks. But she has a team of people, one of them has a team of people that a week later call up every single customer and ask them, hey, did you get your product? How'd you like it? What did you think of it? Da, 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 da. And she's got the most amazingly loyal following of nearly 100,000 people who just absolute fans of her product. It's a lamb leather sash bag, like a shoulder bag,
right?
And it just goes to show that even though it's an internet-based business, you can still create a fan following by keeping in touch and being in personal communication with them. And because there'll always be someone who'll come in and knock it off, and it'll be cheaper or it'll be faster delivery or whatever. But if you've built a rapport with your customer, they're always going to be loyal. And so that's a real, huge warning for anybody starting out doing internet business. You must keep contact with your customers.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just in the interest of people that might want to check it out, do you want to? Can you mention who she is on Facebook?
Yeah, it's the website is The Sash Bag, TheSashBag.com, and we haven't started shipping to Australia yet. We're shipping into the US and Canada, and Australia is going to come online probably in 2018. But we do ship internationally if you order from Australia right now. But it's just to me, it's going to be the next fanny pack. And, it's another UGG in the making. It's such a beautiful product made out of lamb leather, which is sort of like a golf glove leather,
mm-hmm.
And it's got all these pouches and pockets. So you never know that you're wearing it. So you wear this bag like apparel rather than some heavy thing that you put on your shoulder.
Cool. Sounds great. All right. Well, everyone who's listening, head out there not only to figure out how you can get better at connecting with your audience, but also check out that product. It sounds fantastic.
Mm.
All right, Brian. So let me ask you this question, because in the book you had some interesting times with the teams or the people that you were working with. I'll put it in as interesting. But are you a team player? Do you like working on teams?
I love teams. I've always enjoyed team sports over individual sports. Yeah, and the bottom line is I love teams, but it's really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be. I think so too. I think it can be difficult, but it doesn't necessarily, I always say it doesn't need to be complex.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
The critical thing is to get everyone working towards the same vision, and that's what good leadership is. Good leaders aren't the big, strong type A personalities who slam their fist on the desk. That's an outdated type of leadership. Real leadership now comes with building a camaraderie and a sense of doing good, and a sense of all being part of the same vision. And if you can instill that amongst all the people that you hire, then you are automatically a good leader.
Yeah, and that comes through so often in obviously these podcasts where we're talking about teams all the time. I spoke to one of the All Blacks, or a former All Black, a couple of weeks ago, and he had pretty much exactly what you just said. He echoed those sentiments almost word for word. So yeah, absolutely. Can you tell the listeners then, a little bit about the different teams that did form throughout the UGG journey? I think I counted sort of like 5 iterations. There might have been more, but in my mind when I was going through the book, there were sort of 5 different team environments that were built throughout the course of your time with the company.
Yeah, well, I can tell you who. One was the internal team, you know. My first hire was another sales guy because I just didn't have the time to get out on the road anymore. And he basically approached me to ask if he could work for the company because he loved UGG so much. And I couldn't refuse that passion. Even though I couldn't really afford an employee, I took him on anyway. And it was the best decision I made because he lifted a huge load off me and allowed me to get into more of the marketing and the administration. And then that led to another hire, which was an accountant. And that lifted a lot more pressure off me and then just left me with the marketing, which was my passion and my skill. And that was the first beginnings of the team that grew, you know, like over the Christmas period. Like our business was only really clicking, you know, September through January, which was the winter period here. And then it died off. So we had to have a lot of part-time employees who we let go each year. But that core of 4 or 5 people stayed. And eventually when the company got up to, 5 million, 10 million, then the team grew to, 20 to 30 full-time people all year. The second team would be the retailers themselves. And, I eventually got into a position where I was back out on the road nearly full-time, and I was, playing golf with them in the summertime and surfing with them all year round and being in their stores during all the busy periods, checking out all the inventory and everything. And so that became my second team. And I think that they were the 2 that come to mind. There were other teams I would have loved to have had early on, but my supplier, who I thought was a team member, abandoned me at one point. I had a death with one of my partners, and he didn't think I was going to survive. The company would survive that death. And unbeknownst to me, he, during the summers, took on a different distributor for America, but didn't tell me. And because I was, selling like crazy. We were so successful out in the marketplace with all these new colors and, I had black and charcoal and, the standard sand and natural colors and everything. And it got to be like August, September, and we were supposed to start shipping, and I didn't have a new supplier. But I'd been down to Melbourne, and I found a tannery who said he would back me. And at the 11th hour, he brought on 4 or 5 manufacturers and started supplying them from his tannery in Melbourne. And it helped me to dodge a huge bullet. And the weird thing is that the company that my original supplier teamed up with was called Thunderwear, and they were selling stuff in the windsurfing industry, and they called the new boots Thugs. And I had no idea. I'd heard on the street that there was this company Thugs out there, but I was so worried about trying to get product, I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. And then at this trade show in September, when we were supposed to be shipping, I walked over to find where Thunderwear was, and I stopped short because there was all of my black and charcoal and sand and natural boots in this other booth with the Thugs labels on instead of UGG labels. And that's when I knew I was going to be out of business, And luckily the guy from Melbourne came on immediately and started sending product in. And I was able to survive, we're getting about 5,000 pairs a week from, October, November, December. And we survived. We threw away about $1 million of orders at wholesale. But a weird thing happened during the Christmas New Year period. The customs broker screwed up and sent 2,000 pairs of Thugs to my warehouse and 1,000 pairs of my UGG boots up to his. And so I called the guy up. He was about 45 minutes away. And I said, hey, let's swap them out. And I did. And when I was driving back to San Diego, I was wondering, how come we couldn't keep boots on the floor for 24 hours? We were wiped out every single week. And his warehouse, which was way bigger than ours, was floor to ceiling full of sheepskin boots that hadn't sold. And that was when I realized how critical my customers were and the loyalty they had, because they threw away nearly $2 million at retail rather than buy from a knockoff, supplier. So that was a great example of my team rallying behind me when they realized I got screwed by my manufacturer.
Yeah, and I think that's innovative to think that way, especially the time we're talking about at that point is sort of what, late 80s, early 90s. So a lot of these became the examples that people follow today when they start talking about how teams are formed and how they can thrive and all that sort of stuff. But in those days, that sort of thinking wouldn't have been too commonplace, I wouldn't have thought.
No, it wasn't. It was pretty rare.
All right, so I'm interested to know then, how would you characterize the team culture that you did have at UGG during your time?
Well, we were all pretty passionate, By the mid 90s, the product was like almost cultish, because you had all the Hollywood models wearing them, and the exposure we were getting through mass media was amazing. And this was just before the internet started. So all the trade magazines, the retail magazines, if you looked at, all the tabloids, there'd be photos of all these Hollywood stars walking around wearing UGG boots. And so my team was like just absolutely on fire with how popular we were. If anybody found out, hey, I work at UGG, they go, oh, you lucky thing, So it was like it wasn't a cult, but it was a very cultish type attitude we all had, that we were onto something that was one of the hottest things in America at the time. And so it was really easy to get employees and to have people absolutely really looking forward to showing up to work each day.
Yeah, and that's a great position to be in, but it wasn't always that way, was it? So I'd like to sort of, if we can, touch on that other side of the team culture and say, well, if that's the best side of the team culture, how would you characterize some of the worst aspects of team culture that you had to deal with at UGG?
Well, I'll give you one example, but I want to point out that none of the players that I'm talking about were bad people, right? They were all good people we had on the team, but there was this one period in the early 90s where UGG was going through a very, very tough period. The cash flow was almost non-existent, and we were just months away from shipping product, so it would have been July, August, because from September onward we started shipping and had cash flow. But it was, I'll never forget this one night where it was a really rainy day, and I talked to my accountant that we didn't have enough money for payroll. So I went to the bank and I borrowed enough money on my credit card to just keep the thing alive. And I worked out with my accountant that morning, okay, there's this couple here. Well, they don't have kids, so we can cut their pay back a bit for this week. And another guy, well, he's got 2 little kids. We can't cut his pay. And we went through each employee. There were about 15 of them. And I made this arbitrary decision on how much I could pay them, on my credit card. Mm-hmm. And so I went to the bank, and my accountant had cut all the checks. And before I got back from the bank, where I was going to have a staff meeting and explain the situation, he gave all the checks out, right? No. And all these people were going, what the shit's happening here? Why am I getting that? And it was really interesting what happened, because it was like, by the time I got from the bank, it was 4:30 in the afternoon, and by 5 o'clock, I was sitting there by myself in the office. Everyone had gone home, We had about 4 or 5 people resign on the spot, and a couple of others were just pissed off and weren't sure they were going to come back again. And some of the other ones that were absolute loyal, even the ones that had a pay cut, some of them were so loyal, saying, don't worry, Brian, I can afford it. I'll stick with you until we get some cash in, So that was an amazing evening, because I remember sitting alone in the office with the rain pelting on the windows, and I was just it was one of the lowest points of the whole UGG career. But it turned out, 5 or 6 weeks later, that wow, that was a really good thing that happened, because all of the employees that weren't that loyal at the time quit, and saved me having to fire them and or work with them, which is even worse. And it turned out to be a great thing. And there's another thing in my book, which again is the birth of a brand, where one of the best philosophical statements in the book is that nearly always your most disappointing disappointments will become your greatest blessings.
Yeah.
And that was a really good example of how, the worst thing that happened in my whole UGG career had a golden lining to it, because, I got rid of a bunch of people that weren't passionate about the brand and were willing to jump ship at the first big problem.
Yeah, and that's a great example, because I always like to say, when you're in a crisis in a team situation, you're guaranteed to see two things. You're guaranteed to see the best of the team culture, and you're guaranteed to see the worst of the team culture. And it's in those crisis points that you see both of them at the same time. And I think that is
a fantastic quote. I love that.
Yeah, it's just the way that it seems to happen. And having been in my corporate career, a similar situation where you're sort of trying to arbitrarily decide what happens. And I think it comes back to that other point, which is in the book, which is that people will perceive things from their center of the universe.
Oh, isn't that true? Yeah.
It's just so true. And you can't overlay, you can't grab that person and drag them into your center of the universe. They are going to perceive it that way and make their decisions from that side of what they're seeing it.
Yeah, and you can't blame them. That's why I prefaced my previous story about none of them were bad people. They, we all see everything around us from our point at the center of our own little universe, and universes can collide, and the stronger one takes over the weaker one, or they meld in voluntarily, So the ones that disappeared were not bad people. They were just seeing things from their own perspective that didn't line up with what they were looking for in their life. And it's very healthy and natural that they should just pass by, when the, that universes collide, they just go their own way.
Yeah, and there's no need to harbor any negative or ill will against that. When you have that point of view, you can see it as something that's passing. It's not something that's going to be around forever.
And it's not something that was your fault.
No, that's exactly right. Or the other person's necessarily. I mean, it's just the circumstances are there and everyone's going to react. As you say, I think everyone has the intention of it doing the most positive thing they can, whether it's to protect themselves. Like you said, your father didn't sort of be negative in the outset for the sake of being negative. He did it to protect you or to try and save you from something. These people who made those decisions to leave did the same thing.
Yep, that's absolutely right.
And I think as we move on, and I'm conscious of the time, Brian. I don't want to hold you up forever, although I could sit with you for days. I think just pulling this apart.
I feel the same. So don't worry about the time.
Okay, fantastic. All right, well, we'll push on. Having looked back on it all now, and you've obviously reflected on it and taken so many great lessons out of it, if you could go back in time and paddle out into the surf and you bumped into yourself in your 20s when you'd first got to California and you had a conversation, what is it that you'd like to tell yourself?
In my 20s, I didn't start until I was 29, so I'm going to answer it from that perspective.
Yep.
In my 20s, I would have told myself, go for it, right? And I eventually did. The reason I stuck around to graduate as an accountant was that I never quit anything, and you can tell that from the book. There's 50 times in that book where I should have given up, but I didn't.
Yep.
And it's just my nature is that I didn't want to quit before I graduated, and that's why I quit the day I did graduate, right? Purely because I didn't want to, fail. So going back to your question, in my 20s, I always wanted to do something entrepreneurial. I used to study, when I'd go to the sandwich shop in Perth, at lunchtime, I'd absent-mindedly work out, how many sandwiches are these guys selling per hour, and what's the price of the sandwiches, and how much does the rent cost, and how, I was running profitability studies on every time I could get a chance, and so I always had the mind of an entrepreneur, and so my advice would have been then to just whatever it is you want to do, go for it, right? I'm going to answer it another way now with hindsight. Let's say I'm 45 paddling out for a surf.
Yep.
Right? And I look back on the UGG business and I think, okay, what would I have changed there? I would have hired someone very early on who understood finance, right? Because even though I was an accountant and I could do profit and loss, I really didn't know anything about forecasting and cash flow. And my attitude was, well, we sold $1 million this year and we only made $20,000, right? Mm-hmm. So next year I'm going to sell 2 million and then I'll have an extra $1 million in the bank. But it doesn't work that way because the cost of bringing in more product, the cost of staff, the cost of everything, you could sell 2 million and come out negative $20,000.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So my accounting was no help to me. I wished I had had somebody who could have done forecasting and budgeting and especially cash flow to see the high demand for cash in August, September, October when I was buying product to, the next year when all the sales had finished. It's now February, March, April. We're going into zero income for 5 or 6 months. That was where I came unstuck every single year. And the bigger I got, the worse the problem became because I just kept thinking I just have to keep doubling.
Yeah, and it sounds logical, and some people I think get in that position and they think that this is a really good position, and then it's almost like the wave overtakes them and they just get absolutely dumped in that situation.
Oh, that was a great analogy. You got some good analogies. I like that.
I've just come off reading your books. I've got them all floating around in my mind. It's working well for me.
That's great.
Okay, so Brian, how about we do the Barnraisers top 10?
Well, let's see where we go. Okay.
All right. Number 1, what is one thing you feel must be present or created for a team to succeed?
They have to buy into the vision.
Number 2, what is one thing you feel must be avoided or overcome in order for a team to succeed?
Oh, there's some good stories in the book about that. When people get on your team who have a personal agenda that isn't in alignment with what your goals are, that's usually very deceitful of them at the beginning, but can be disastrous. I had one guy come into the company at the request of my, the final guy that put all the capital in to finance it. We were about 15 million. He would only do it if he brought in this accountant guy to look over my shoulder. Well, the guy had another agenda. He wanted to get rid of me as soon as possible and make himself the CEO. And it's a great story with a good positive outcome for me. But that was a 2-year period where it was the worst part of my life. So if you can sense that anybody has a hidden agenda on your team, absolutely immediately get rid of them.
Yep. And have you got any tips? I don't usually jump into these questions, but I will. But how do you find out that that's the case? I mean, in your case, it was so blatant. I remember it from the book clearly. But how would you go about trying to figure that out in a team scenario? Because you trying to push the issue doesn't always help things.
Yeah. Well, the first clue is closed door meetings.
Yeah.
They'll bring somebody in, and I found out years later that this one guy I was just talking about would call people into his office and tell him, if Brian Smith talks to you, I want to know exactly what he said, or you're fired, and he didn't even have the power to fire him, but he terrified a lot of people. So the closed doors was a giveaway. The other thing is when you get in you'll be in a committee meeting or something, and they'll say something that just doesn't align with the big picture of where you want to go, that's something to jump on really quickly as well. Figure out, is it just this one time? Did I make a bad decision? But if it happens over and over and over again, you know that the guy isn't on your team. He's pulling for a different result.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. No, they're great tips, and I wholeheartedly agree with those. Yeah, terrific. Yeah. All right, number 3. What team, current or historic, would you love to have been a member of?
I would have loved to have been Richard Branson's right-hand guy, because he was such a maverick. You know, I always felt like I was a lot like him, not in the same scope as the way he did things. But then again, my crippling thing was we were 6 months broke and 6 months flurrying. You know, he had a 12-month, business going, and that was a lot easier. But I would have loved to have sort of hung out and watched how he made decisions and did things.
Okay. You've never had a conversation where you've never met the guy?
Not yet, but I got a feeling I'm going to do it this coming year in 2018. We're trip planned to Necker Island, and hopefully he'll be there.
Oh, fantastic. I'd love to be a fly on the wall hearing you two swapping stories and having a chat. I think that'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, number 4. Who is an ultimate team player in your eyes and why?
The one who puts the company ahead of himself, right? And remember that dark day I told you about? Several of the guys who I cut their pay said, Brian, we don't care. We're in this. We see this, working in. And the irony is, in 2-3 weeks, I was able to pay them their back pay, and we had cash flow again. So it paid off for them, and they were truly the ones who were my most valuable employees and team members, because they put the vision of the company ahead of their own personal issues.
Number 5, what 3 qualities make someone a great teammate or colleague?
I'd have to say communication is probably the first one. And the second one is that they like their teammates, who they're working with. Probably the third one comes back to, excuse me. The third one comes back to sharing that vision. They'd be the three most important things. Communication especially.
Yeah. Number 6, what 3 qualities make someone a great coach or manager?
For sure, communication. If you can't impart your vision, then the team's going to run around blind.
And the other 2?
I guess liking the team, just like the question before, liking the team that you've built,
mm-hmm.
and keeping sure they all have the same vision.
Yep. So the same things.
Pretty much the same thing, yeah.
Number 7, what is one thing that instantly makes you feel part of a team?
Having common goals, scoring more points than the opposition.
And number 8, what's one thing that instantly makes you feel excluded from a team?
When the communication gets warped, and that can be unconscious or very conscious, like that guy I told you about. But when you start being excluded from meetings or start feeling like what you were just told is bullshit or indifference, they're when you realize that you're not really on a good team.
Yeah. Number 9, what is your fondest team memory?
I think, gosh, that's a good one. I got my personal memories, but the team memory. Probably it would be, the trade show where we were all together, and we'd always been wanting to get into this. The biggest retailer in America is a shoe company or a department store called Nordstrom. It's sort of like David Jones in Australia.
Yep.
And the buyer came in and he said to my chief salesman at the time, I've got $1 million to spend. You make up the sizes and colors and styles, and I don't care what they are. Just make it work. That we all high-fived that night because we'd overcome the barrier of having to go in and plead and coerce them into buying product. Now they just came in automatically. That was great.
Yeah, I love the way you say you waited to high five until that night. I just imagine you all trying to contain yourselves as he's telling you the order.
Yeah.
All right, number 10. What is one thing you'd like to hear a coach, manager, boss, or teammate say about you?
I think that Brian was honest and he treated us well.
Very nice. Very nice. All right, so that's the Barnraisers top 10. So, Brian, before we go, I do have to ask. Obviously, we've got the book. We've got the birth of a brand. What I want to do, though, is ask you, what are you doing now, and how can people get in touch with you if they want to sort of reach out?
Sure. Now I'm a full-time speaker from the stage. I've taken that book. It's been really successful, and that's led me to speaking from the stage. In fact, I was down in Melbourne about a year ago at the International Marketing Conference and had a great talk there. I just do keynote speeches, and that's really what I love. It's my passion now to help entrepreneurs try and improve their lives. And you can reach me at the website, which is uggfounder.com. That's uggfounder.com. And if any of your listeners are part of a company that would love to have a really cool, inspirational and motivational keynote, I'm the guy. And I love every chance I can to get back to Australia.
Oh, perfect. We love having you back here too. And I'll be definitely keeping an eye out because I want to come and hear this live in the flesh, because the book is really something that I think everyone should be able to read and take something out of. Yeah,
that's fantastic. Thanks. And I'll my keynote is really it's a really fun hour.
Yeah. I've actually had a look on the website, and it looks to be a really impactful sort of hour that people spend. And Brian, listen, I know you have to run, but thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Okay, Dan, pleasure. It was great talking to you.
All right. So that's Brian Smith, ladies and gentlemen. What a great guy. I really enjoyed that conversation, and I would recommend anyone who is even remotely interested in building a business or a team should read Brian's book, The Birth of a Brand, because it really does give you a sense of what to expect in those early days swimming around the pond as a tadpole. Of course, as Brian mentioned, if you want to make contact or inquire about Brian's speaking schedule, the best place to check it all out is on his website, briansmithspeaker.com, and you'll find that in the show notes. And with that, we've just about reached the end of our first episode for the year. I hope you liked it, and I also hope you liked some of the changes we've made around the place. As you might have seen and heard, we've been busy over the holidays putting together a new look and feel for the show. And now that we've released our first episode, I'd love to know what you think. So please jump on social media. It's at Dan J. Stones on Instagram or at Barnraisers Pod on Twitter and Facebook, and let me know what you liked or what you didn't. And if there's anyone or anything that you think would help make this podcast better, please tell me. Lastly, and probably most importantly, if you want someone to talk to about your team, please give me a shout. I've mentioned it on the show a few times before, but I want everyone to know that when I'm not speaking with all the amazing guests on this podcast, I run a company that specializes in challenging, inspiring, and equipping teams all over the world to work better together. So if you want to do some training with your team or would like some help building a better team culture in your business, then head on over to shiftingpeers.com and get in touch. We really do travel all over the world, and we'd love to come and spend some time with your team. So as I said, please reach out. Okay, so that's it. Thanks again for listening to Barnraisers, conversations with the world's ultimate team players. I've been Dan Stones. Bye for now.